So, welcome to the NJC's 10-minute takeaway, where we will try and cram as much information as we can into a 10-minute workshop. So, I'm Tom Stenson, Head of Training for the NJC, and today I'm joined by Lynne Barry. Hi, Lynne.
Hi there, Tom.
And today's topic, we're going to be discussing mirrors and how we can encourage our pupils to use them effectively. And so, our time starts now. I read an interesting comment on social media recently, Lynne, and it was from an instructor who said pretty much these words: I've told my pupils 1,000 times to check their mirrors and they're still not checking them.
Yeah, I think I see that quite a lot actually, and I know that it can get quite frustrating for PDIs and ADIs. It's a big bone of contention, really, and mirrors is something that comes up all the time. The one thing I would say is that I think if you're being client-centered and you're coaching, you're going to actually pass this back to your pupil, because otherwise we're doing all the hard work, and
Yeah.
at the end of the lesson I think some people are just getting out of the car thinking, well, that didn't go well, they're still not checking their mirrors.
Mm.
I do remember quite a long time ago having a girl, and I just felt that she was not improving her mirrors, and I felt like I was nagging her to do it, and it didn't feel right.
Mm.
I pulled over, we talked about mirrors. I asked her on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is I don't check my mirrors at all, and 10 is I check them all the time. How did she feel she was doing with her mirrors? And she put herself at a 6. And I instantly in my head thought, oh, so you do know you're not doing these properly. And I've been working really hard here.
Yeah.
And I asked her what she needed to do to get that better. She told me. So I said, right, over to you then. Let's go and see, let's go and see if you can start to improve this in the next 5 or 10 minutes. And actually, she started to improve quite quickly. And I felt like I wasn't then doing all the work, getting really het up about it. And I passed it back over to her. So
Mm.
I do think one thing is, let's pass it back over to them more. But
Yeah.
I also feel when I sit there watching lessons taking place, that actually it's the way questions are worded
Mm.
about mirrors. I don't think people always use the best questions that they could ask. I don't know what you feel about that.
Yeah, one of the questions I tend to ask my learners in those situations, and I relate it to something that most people have done hundreds of times, and that's crossing the road. I
Mm.
say to my learner, what's the first thing you do before you cross the road? And they say, well, I look both ways. I say, well, why'd you do that, Fred? And Fred says, well, because I don't want to get run over. I go, okay, so how can we relate that to driving then? It's not just us. We don't want to get run over. We don't want to affect other people. And I agree. I think getting that conversation with that learner and getting them to take that responsibility more, I think is such an important thing. Because if we are constantly nagging at them, I think that, it sort of plays a negative effect, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, when we talked earlier, Tom, we were talking about the fact that if we're just saying, check your mirrors, have you checked your mirrors before we come out round a parked car, for example, or move over to the right, maybe we could get them thinking more by just actually not even mentioning the mirrors, but saying something like, is there anything overtaking?
Yeah.
Are there any blue lights at the back of us at the moment? And then actually your pupil instantly seems to look.
Yeah.
And we haven't mentioned the word mirror.
No.
I
And
don't.
those types of questions, I think they're really good and they're really simple because the pupil typically they'll want to give us an answer. And in order to give us an answer of is anything overtaking, they need to have a look.
Yeah.
And even if they do just say, well, no, there's not, and they haven't looked, well, then I've got the question, how do you know there's no one overtaking? And
Yeah.
it always comes down for me to having that correct conversation, which always starts from the first ever time they get in the car. I want them to understand that, this is a partnership. We're both going to be moving forward. But as we go through this, there's more responsibility to you. Because I feel like something you mentioned earlier, and personally, I don't like the term check your mirrors, but I think if we're only ever telling them to do that, what happens when they pass their test and there's no one there to tell them?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, do you use questions like, is there anything on the outside? You mentioned earlier that in early stages, you actually help them a lot more and do the
Yeah,
mirrors
so
for them.
I tend to use a technique in the very early stage. So let's say on their first ever lesson, if I've taken the responsibility for observations, if we've got a parked vehicle, I might say something to them like, Fred, there's nothing behind us, or there's nothing close behind us, and there's nothing overtaking, so give this vehicle plenty of room. And what I tend to find is if I do that a couple of times, it's my responsibility to manage that risk because they're concentrating on the control. But they instinctively start to check their mirrors because they're listening. There's nothing behind. So they confirm it themselves and they start to look. But at no point have I actually said to them, you need to check this mirror, or why might you need to check this mirror? Because, I think we need to give people a bit more credit than we tend to do. People aren't stupid and they don't typically want to crash. Well, that's my opinion anyway. So yeah, I tend to do that in the early stages with some learners, and I find that to be really effective. And like I say, I've not mentioned a single mirror. I've just explained what we're doing, and they instinctively start to do it.
Well, that's something maybe people could try and see if it works for them. I also think that we need to use opportunities when they arise with mirrors to teach the why part
Yeah,
more. So, if you do have a motorbike at the back of you, which mirror can you see it in now? Is it in your main one? Has it come into the side one yet? And if it has, is it out of the main one now? I feel that sometimes we don't use those golden opportunities enough.
yeah,
Or how many people, you're going along a dual carriageway, and there are blue lights at the back, and how many people ahead obviously haven't been checking the mirrors enough and therefore are not moving over because they just haven't spotted anything at the back. So I think we do need to use opportunities, and also probably questions like, what is at the back of us at the moment? How do you feel about where it is? Is it too close? And if it is, what we're going to do about it?
yeah.
Are you okay with where it is? You're happy with where it is? And how quickly is that changing? Has it changed again yet? And
Mm.
sometimes mine will start to say to me, oh, that car's gone now, Lynn.
Yeah,
So that they know themselves that it's gone. That's great. Then you must be checking your mirrors. Okay. If
yeah.
you knew that, well done. So rather than this constant, let's do the mirrors, maybe try and do it in a slightly different way.
Uh, I think if we can make it more positive as well. I had a situation today which I thought was really good where I picked a learner up, we were heading off to our local area to go and practice some parking. She's actually got her test on Monday next week. So she's, in my opinion, she's pretty independent, but I like the question and the conversation with her. Anyway, a vehicle overtook us. And she said to me, I knew he was going to do that. So I said, well, how did you know he was going to do that? She said, well, he'd been really close behind me on those, on those bends. And I know that this straight comes up and I've seen other people overtake.
That's
So
good.
yeah, so from that situation, I'm sat there as the instructor thinking, oh, fantastic. This is really good.
Yeah.
So even if I was using it proactively there, I still managed to find out what the process was in my pupil's head. I knew that she'd seen the overtaker because she started to ease off to allow him to go past. So from a physical point of view, I've seen it, but from an internal and emotional point of view, it was good that she'd assessed it. So I knew that she'd been checking her mirrors and I didn't have to say the word mirror once.
Yeah, I agree. I also think that sometimes we and this is true of other things other than just mirrors, we think because we've told them something, they're going to be doing it and remembering it.
Yeah.
So I think it's good just to clarify things like, what's the difference between your main mirror and your side mirrors? Why have we got the side mirrors there? Because we teach that at the beginning doesn't mean to say they remember it.
Uh,
And the fact that things, have a look at it with them, things are smaller in the side mirrors. Why is that? Where is that car then? What's the difference going to be? So that we make it slightly more interesting than just check your mirrors.
yeah.
Because a classic for me is a lad that got in the car recently and said, when I take my test, Dad says I've got to move my head more to watch my mirrors.
Yeah.
Because they read all these sorts of fallacies, if you like.
Yeah.
And then they start to do things which are totally unnatural. And I explained that wasn't the case at all.
Yeah.
But they have some strange ideas about mirrors, I think. And we need to just make sure that what we think they know is what they actually know. And that's why we're always clarifying things.
Yeah.
We do use opportunities because there's so many out there, and a lot of them involve the mirrors in actual fact.
And I think it relates to what you said a moment ago. I know we've discussed this before, and for me, it's the three-letter magical word, which is why. It isn't about checking the mirror, it's about gaining the information. And what are we going to do with that information? Why are we checking it? What are we looking for? And then for my learner, what are you going to do? If that, if that emergency service vehicle is racing down behind you, great, you've seen it. So what's the next stage? What are you going to do now? And I think if we can get them to think more about that why instead of just check your mirror, hopefully we're going to have a more positive effect.
I think a conversation as well. So mirror signal position, instead of going through mirror signal position, sometimes I'll say something like, so shall we check what's behind? Are you happy with what's behind?
Yeah.
Are you going to show them what we're going to do then?
Mm.
And then we get the signal going on. And then, so how's that going to be confirmed? Well, let's move into position. And, a conversation like that can have almost more use than just keep saying, check your mirrors, put your signal on, let's move across. It has quite a lot of importance. And I think doing it differently is going to help them learn why they're doing it. And we've talked before in these about the analysis.
Right, that is our 10 minutes up. And as always, thank you very much for joining us, Lynn. And if anybody would like to know any more, then please visit our training page on the website, and you can see a list of our courses.